Warning, this video may contain content that may not be suitable for children or anyone else that is easily offended. Strong language, graphic content, nudity, bad jokes, and a possible idiot, aka myself, may be featured in the following clip. Viewer discretion is advised. Channel is not responsible for any damages that you receive watching this video. Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Zems, and welcome to another reaction video. Today we're going to be reacting to the Russian Death March by Mrballen. If you guys are a fan of the strange, dark, mysterious love in a story format, make sure you head down to the description box, hit that link, and go follow Mrballen and watch the video in its entirety without me pausing and stopping through the whole thing. And the reason I say that because a lot of people don't like when I pause and stop and talk through the video, which is why I say from the beginning, if you don't want me pausing and talking through the whole thing, go watch the original video. Please stop leaving hate comments down there and saying stuff like, oh, you suck, stop pausing the video, you're not funny. That's fine. Whatever you're going through in life, I really hope it passes and you live life happily. I'm not going to scoop down to that kind of negativity. Positive vibe only on this channel, and you can say what you want. I'm just going to tell you thank you for supporting the cause and leaving a comment, because technically you are still helping the channel, so I really appreciate that. This video was recommended to me by is it W-Borg or U-Borg, or whatever you want to go by. Thank you so much for recommending it. For those of you that have been supporting me, keep liking, keep subscribing, keep supporting your boy, and the videos will keep coming.
Today's story is about an event that was so horrifying, the one person who survived it couldn't speak when she finally stumbled, bloody and terrified,
she finished?
out of the forest. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please send the like button on a blind date with Karen to a restaurant that has less than perfect service and no manager on duty. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads.
Let's get it.
All right, let's
get the ball and dance in the chat. Mrballen.
By 1993, Lyudmila Korovina, who was a 41-year-old Russian hiking instructor, came under fairly intense criticism from her colleagues for being too survivalist with her students.
You can never be too
survivalist. They thought she was a little bit too aggressive with how she pushed her students, putting them in unnecessarily risky situations out in the wild where they weren't really ready for it, and at any point she might push them too far and wind up getting someone killed. Her students have—
I mean, as long as she's not pushed them to the point where they're injured, because I went through a couple of coaches while I was injured, they still kept trying to get me to play, and I had to tell them, like, no, you're not about to hurt my body for order for you to win a game, you know what I'm saying? So I had to stop that, like, right there. Like, when she's putting them through it and they can handle it and nobody's crying about it, I mean, they're coming to her for a reason, so she obviously knows what she's doing. Let the woman be.
However, absolutely adored her. They said on the mountains she was fearless and in tune with nature, and they felt very safe around her. And then at camp, she was very motherly and tender and always took the time to make sure all of her students were taken care of well before she was. Former students have said the mentorship they received from Lyudmila went well beyond just hiking instruction. They said she taught a mindset that they carried with them into adulthood, and they pointed to as one of the main reasons they were successful later in life. In the summer of 1993, Lyudmila was scheduled to lead an expedition up to the Mrballen Ridge, which is in eastern Siberia, and it's one of the oldest mountains on the planet. With her on this expedition would be 6 fairly experienced hiking students that ranged in ages from 15 to 24 years old. One of those 6 students was a 23-year-old young man named Sasha, who, although he was not Lyudmila's biological son, she called him her son because she had raised him ever since he was a young child, and he looked at Lyudmila as his mother. Sasha also happened to be the most physically fit and competent of—
How hard is it to learn Russian? Look at this. This is incredible. Like, that's crazy. Like, I would never be able to read something like that. Shout out to people that understand Russian or can speak Russian. That's amazing. Or any other language for that matter, because I want to so bad. It just takes so much time. I need a tutor too as well.
Of all 6 hiking students, and he would function more like an assistant to Lyudmila on this particular hike rather than a pupil. The other 5 students were 24-year-old Tatiana, 19-year-old Denis, 16-year-old Victoria, 15-year-old Timur, and 17-year-old Valentina, who she is the only reason we know anything about the horrible things that happened to this group up on Mrballen.
She's the only one that survived?
On August 1st, 1993, Lyudmila and her hiking group boarded a Trans-Siberian railway car in Kazakhstan, and later that day they arrived in a town called Marino, which is on the eastern side of Siberia on the southern end, and it butts up against the base of the Mrballen mountain range. The Mrballen mountain was not considered a very dangerous hike to make. It was relatively small. It was just under 2,400 meters in elevation. And in the summertime, you'd have scores of recreational hikers all over this mountain range. Plus, the weather forecast for Ludmila and her group's multi-day hike in that mountain range was going to be incredibly favorable. It was going to be warm, clear, nice summer weather. Ludmila had charted a course that began just outside of the town of Marino, which is the town they were staying in that first night. They were going to start next to Lake Baikal, which is the deepest lake in Russia. From the lake, they were going to move north and inland over this stretch that was totally barren. There was no trees, it was just rocks and grass, before ultimately reaching the Hamar Daban Ridge, which was their destination. And at that point, there would be shelter and firewood, and they could take a break before ultimately descending. And so in total, from the lake all the way to Hamar Daban Ridge was approximately 50 miles. Ludmila's group would not be the only group making this particular movement towards Hamar Daban Ridge.
50 miles? Bruh, I did 12 and I was dying. I was gassed. Was it 12 or was it 14? I don't remember. That's not including their clothes and their weights and all that stuff that they're carrying on them. And I'm pretty sure he said that the weather was clear. I feel like the weather's about to take a turn for the worse. People are about to get lost and they're about to try to for other people, and then they're going to get some circumstances going to make them go down the wrong path or something like that, because all these stories, they always end up like that. And the fact that he already said the 17-year-old survived, which I thought would have been the teacher because she's a survival expert and everybody despised her because she was so good and she pushed people to their limits, but
they'd be taking their own path, but there'd be two other groups that were on similar courses, basically parallel to them, making their way up to the ridge. And one of those groups was actually led by Ludmila's 16-year-old biological daughter, and they had actually made plans to meet up on one of the last days of this multi-day hike. As they were making their descent, there was a forest they were going to meet up in. So Ludmila and her 6 students stayed the night in Marino, and the next morning they got up early and made their way over to Lake Baikal. The weather's beautiful, they're excited to start their journey, and they take off. And everything was going great until the late afternoon. It would turn out the weather forecasters were just completely wrong, and as soon as the group climbed above the tree line, the temperatures plummeted and it started raining and snowing on them. It was just absolutely miserable.
How many times I gotta tell you guys, I am Zim, the survival expert, the survival connoisseur, the expertissimo of survival, bro. I told you, it's gonna be something with the weather that's gonna deter them, bro. How do I know these things? It's just, oh man. But the thing was, they said they had the right idea. They set out early on the day it was the clearest. I give them that, but you cannot always predict the weather, because it can turn like this. Mother Nature is I'm telling you guys, man. Me and Mr. Ballen are here with ours. I'm telling you, we're synced together. We're conjoined twins.
Treacherous weather would persist over the next few days, and it really started to destroy the morale in the group. But Ludmila, she was a pro, and she had hiked in far worse conditions than this, and so she made a point of telling the group that this stuff happens. Bad weather happens. We are prepared. We are trained. We're going to be fine.
Great leader.
We need to have a positive attitude about this. We need to just keep pushing forward and not play victim.
You can tell it's cold.
That was enough to inspire the group to just keep on going. You know, they believed in Ludmila, and she's telling them to keep going, so they kept going. By the evening of August 4th, so this is 3 full days of hiking later, they were only about 30 minutes away from the summit. They have now reached the point where they are in the open section of the mountain, where there is no reprieve from the wind or the rain or the snow. There's no trees to block anything.
Yep.
And so it's just an absolute abomination trying to climb this last stretch. Every step is like an eternity as the wind just cuts through their clothes and they're soaking wet and miserable. Ludmila.
For those of you that have never been through icy wind, that stuff hurts. Like he said, it feels like somebody is like cutting your skin with like razor blades. That's how it feels. Like the air is legit blowing knife. That's what it feels like. So just picture the time you've been like the coldest, and just picture like somebody taking a knife and going like this. Just like through your whole body, your ears and stuff. Your ears feel like somebody took like a lighter and put the lighter like next to your ear. Everything is just like burning. Like I thought you could only get hot during the summer. Like nah, you can get hot from this the wind chill, whatever they're called. And Missouri is the #1 reason why I do not like winter no more, because I used to love winter. I think I said that in one of my other videos, but Missouri messed that up for me when I felt the same wind that he's talking about.
Mila's students were not about to ask for a break. They knew how she operated. She was someone that really believed in pushing through your own pain and fatigue and misery, and she always led by example, and they saw her, you know, right out in front leading the charge up towards the Hamar Daban Ridge. And so they were very surprised when she stopped and she turned around and told them, we're taking a break. And in fact, we're actually going to camp out for the night right where we are right here. No one knows why Ludmila made this decision.
Yeah.
You know, on the one hand, it does make sense to take a break and say, you know what, we'll reach the summit tomorrow. We've had a really hard couple of days here with the bad weather. We'll make camp and we'll get some rest and we'll hit the summit tomorrow.
The weather's bad.
That makes sense. But where she elected to make camp does not make sense.
Right.
She had them stop right smack dab in the middle of this totally open section of the mountain where there are no trees, there's no objects to protect them from the horrible wind and snow and ice and rain that's just going to be pelting them all night. And so some people have speculated that when she looked at her crew of hikers, they were so badly beaten down and tired and miserable that she knew she could not ask them to go any further. And so that was why she said, let's just make camp here, we'll make do. Others have said her map may not have been very accurate, and so she didn't know how close she was to the summit, where at the summit there was literally a shelter that had firewood and a place for you to rest. Maybe she didn't know she was so close. Perhaps she thought she was much farther away and this is the best we can do. But what
I think happened was kind of like what he said. She looked back and seen out the rest of her people were kind of like beaten down, because she's done this multiple times. I'm pretty sure she's been in these kind of situations. She looked down and seen them that was like the beat up and stuff. But at the same time, I kind of think she was reaching her breaking point as well, because her being a survival expert, I don't think she would have stopped right there. I was like, hey, a little bit further, at least till we get to like some trees or something, like stop her right in the middle of it. I don't think that was a good idea. Just from the outside looking in, like I said, I'm not a survival expert, but me personally, I wouldn't have stopped right in the middle. I would have kept pushing a little bit further, maybe like in some kind of ditch or something where like the wind is kind of going over, maybe like a cave, something.
What the inaccurate map theory does not account for is Ludmila would have known there is a forest about 2.5 miles down the mountain, because the whole time they've been on this hike, they've tried to stay up above the tree line as they make this final approach up to the ridge. And so she would have known there's a forest right down there. And if I wanted to, I could go down there and seek shelter in the trees. And so for whatever reason, she decided that we can't go down to the forest, we got to stay here. And so perhaps that lends more credibility to the idea that the group was far more beaten down than maybe we even realize. And she thought, they can't make the 2.5 mile journey. We're going to have to just make camp here and make do. But regardless of her reasoning, they did make camp right in the middle of this open section. They set up 2 wet, crappy tents, and they used their little kerosene stoves to make a tiny meal, and then they all crammed inside of these 2 tents and huddled as the wind howled outside. That night, the storm got much worse. The wind picked up, and again, they're totally exposed on this open section of the mountain.
I can't
So they're just getting destroyed by this wind. And at about 2 a.m., the wind actually broke the ropes that were holding the tents down, and they had to go outside and retie them, and they were able to do that. And then a couple hours later, at about 4 a.m., the wind actually lifted up the section of the tent that was facing where the wind was blowing, and it pulled the tent up in such a way that water rushed into the tent and soaked their sleeping bags. And they were able to go outside and they put the stakes back down in the ground, but you know, they were sleeping in wet sleeping bags in the middle of this mountain in the middle of a storm. So this is getting quite dangerous at this point. But they were able to eventually fall asleep, and at about 10 a.m. the next morning, Ludmila gets up and looks outside, and she can see that everything is frozen, that it's snowed and the temperatures have dropped again, and everything is just snow and ice. And she knows that, you know, we're actually reaching very dangerous hypothermia territory, and if we don't warm up soon, this could be life-threatening. And so she woke everybody up and she said, we need to go down into that forest and we need to start a fire as soon as possible. And so everybody said, all right, they got up, they started packing up their things, rolled up their tents, and they began walking down the mountain in a line. Although this was not intended, when Ludmila had said, we will reach the summit tomorrow, that had delayed their schedule. And it meant they were not going to be able to meet up with her daughter the next day. But now in the morning, when they're deciding basically to abandon the summit and turn around and head down again, they were now back on schedule to meet up with her daughter down in the forest. However, her daughter said she was at the rendezvous point in the forest, and Ludmila and the 6 other hikers never showed. 4 days later, on August 9th, a group of Ukrainian kayakers were making their way down this river in southern Siberia, and they were passing by the Mrballen mountain range. And so as they're kind of slowly moving their way down, it's this beautiful morning, and they're looking up at the mountains all around them, the leader of this group happens to see something move on his left side. There's a forest right up against the left side of this river, and he turns his head and he has to do a double take because there is this girl who's standing there at the edge of the forest looking out at them totally expressionless, and she's covered in blood and she's not doing anything, she's just standing there. And at first, he actually thought, like, we need to leave. His first thought was, we need to just get away from this person. There's something wrong with this person.
Yo, that'd have been me, bro. I seen too many movies. I would have seen that and I would have dipped. I think it was called Carrie. Yeah, I think the last movie I seen when she was drenched in blood, bro. I would have been out of Dodge. But you never know. That's another thing. You just gotta take chances, man. You see somebody covered in blood, they may need help or they may be the killer. You just never know, man. A lot of people that haven't been to cold like that, man, there's cold temperatures to the point you just shut down. We slept out there. It was like negative something. I forgot what it was in Missouri. It was close to negative, I believe. I don't want to say it like I'm capping, but it was pretty cold. Like the dirt froze. Like it was frozen. We had to dig a V-shaped thing. It's called a hasty fighting position. We had to dig it, but I didn't have enough time to dig. Didn't have enough time to dig it, and my feet was sticking out the whole night. And when I woke up, I could not feel my toes. When I wiggled my toes, I couldn't feel them. My feet was burning. I legit thought I had frostbite. Like at least 2 to 3 days that we were there, I couldn't feel my feet, bruh. It's like nothing you can do about the cold at all. So bad, bruh. Everything you touch, like you touch something, your hands would burn. It felt like something like you started bleeding, but you're not. It just burns. You touch a strap, it burns. You tie your boot, it burns. Everything just burned. And I just didn't want to touch nothing anymore. I just shut down. I wasn't talking to people. I was just like a robot. I couldn't eat breakfast. I couldn't eat. Like I wasn't in the mood for anything. I didn't feel hungry. I didn't feel hydrated. I was done. And I can only imagine what they feel like because they up in the mountains, man. They're in the middle of a blizzard. It's freezing cold. They're inside of a wet tent. In the wet tent with the blistering cold wind, bro. Like they're pretty much being frozen alive, man.
But very quickly the group realized, like, we cannot abandon this girl. This is a young girl who should not be out here. I don't know what she's doing out here. And so they turned around and they went on shore and they yelled to her. They said, are you okay? And she just stood there not reacting. And they tried a couple more times to say, hey, we're not going to hurt you. We don't know what's going on. And she didn't say a word. She just stood there in shock. She looked very scared. They finally got up right next to her and they asked her, what are you so scared of? Where are you coming from? And they just could not get her to speak. But they're up close looking at her and, she's got blood all over her. She looks dirty. She looks like she might be sick. And so they decide that, this girl needs help, and they had blankets. And so they threw blankets over her. They put her in one of the kayaks and they brought her back to town. Once in town, the Ukrainian kayakers went and got authorities and said, hey, we found this girl. She was covered in blood, walking out of the forest. We have no idea what's going on with her. And so authorities came over to speak to her. And although she barely spoke, she would finally say that she was 17 years old. Her name was Valentina Yotachenko, and that she had been a part of a 7-person hiking group up along the Hamar-Deban Ridge.
Did they get attacked?
And then she paused, and they said, well, where's your hiking group? How did you get separated? This is what she told them. Back on the morning of August 5th, so this would have been the morning after that terrible night's sleep on the mountain where the tent ropes are breaking and the sleeping bags are getting soaking wet. Well, Valentina wakes up and she looks outside of the tent and she sees Ludmila, and she's standing there with her hands on her hips and she's looking around. She looks very concerned. Valentina goes out there and Ludmila turns to her and says, we need to leave. We need to go down to the forest and we need to make a fire. Can you help me wake everybody up and start having them pack up their stuff so we can get moving? So Valentina goes in, she starts waking people up, and everybody very quickly packs up the tent, packs up their things, and they're in a line and they start walking down the mountain. They had only made it about 10 meters into their descent when Sasha, the 23-year-old young man that Ludmila considered her son, he just suddenly falls. And the other hikers, Valentina included, run over and they help get him up again, and he looks kind of shaken. He takes a couple more steps and he falls again. And this time, when Valentina goes over to try to help him up with the others, they see his eyes are wide and he looks like he's really terrified, and then blood starts rushing out of his nose and his ears and his mouth, and then he just suddenly dies.
What the?
And Ludmila runs over and she grabs him and she's panicking and she's trying to feel for a pulse and she's checking for his heart, and then she screams out in pain and anguish and she yells, he's dead. The other hikers can't believe this is happening. They can't even process that someone, any of them, had died, let alone it be Sasha, the most physically fit and healthy one of all of them, including up until a few minutes ago. He wasn't showing any signs or symptoms that something was wrong. He was perfectly fine.
Did he eat something?
Ludmila was in shock. She's on the ground and she's holding on to Sasha, and she's telling the group that she's not going anywhere. She's staying with Sasha. And Valentina would say the group is just falling apart at this point. You have some of them that are crying, others who are just standing there looking around like, what's happening to us right now?
That would have been me. Like, how do you fall and get up and you just start bleeding out of your mouth and your ears? Did somebody stab him? What's going on? I've never heard of any cold weather injury that'll do that to you. Maybe he'll tell us what happened, or maybe somebody put something in the drink. I don't know, man. Because she was bleeding too, so I don't know if it was blood from other people or what, but what the hell got him bleeding from all these different parts of his body, bruh?
At some point, Ludmila collects herself and she says to the group, go down to the forest. Go down to the forest and start a fire. And Valentina said they didn't want to leave her and they were pleading with her to let them stay. And she said, no, go down to the forest and start a fire. And finally, Valentina said the group would. They'd get together and they'd turn around, and not really knowing what was going to happen next, they just begin walking down this mountain, and they only get a few steps before they hear Ludmila yell out to come back. She's saying, I can't move. And they turn around, and Valentina was towards the front of the returning group as they're going back up the mountain, back to Ludmila. And she's now bleeding out of her nose and her ears and her mouth. And she's heaving like something's going on inside of her. And then all of a sudden she keels over on top of Sasha and she dies right in front of them. And now the group is in hysterics. And Valentina's in the front and she can't see anybody else. And then she turns around and she can't believe what she's seeing to her side. Now everybody else is bleeding from their nose and their ears and their mouth, and some of them are frothing from the mouth. Valentina reached for her mouth and her ears and her nose to look for blood, and there wasn't any. And then she turned and she saw 16-year-old Victoria and 24-year-old Tatiana suddenly fall to the ground, just like Sasha had, except they weren't just laying there. They began rolling around and ripping their clothes off and clutching at their throats, and they're frothing at the mouth. And so Valentina reaches down to try to help Victoria, the 16-year-old, and Victoria bites her on the hand, and she pulls her hand back, and then Victoria curls into a ball and then goes still. And then Tatiana begins hitting her head on a rock over and over and over again until she goes still. At this point, Valentina is in pure survival mode, and so she looks at the other two, which was 15-year-old Timur and 19-year-old Dennis. Everybody else is down on the ground at this point. And she's,
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to say it, I'm gonna bleep it out, but what the bruh? What is this? Bruh, this is tripping me. I ain't never heard of nothing like this, bruh. She can't move? She told them to, she knew something, man. I think she knew something that she wasn't telling everybody else. Cause you're not gonna tell everybody to leave. We gotta go now. Let's go now. Like we gotta go now. Like why? What's going on? Something had to happen, bruh. I don't know what it was. I don't know if the government was testing something, but you're not about to just start bleeding out of your nose and mouth and just collapse like that. And then you're not about to just keep hitting your head on a rock. Why would you hit your head on a rock? And the other one bit her. Why would you bite her? It has to be something much deeper than where we've been led to believe. Because this is outrageous, man. This is tripping me out. This is actually scaring me. This is probably one of the videos that probably scared me the most because he's not telling us what's. I mean, he probably will eventually, but I don't know what's going on right now. And if I was in her shoes, bro, I would have been. I don't know. I probably would have fainted. I probably would have been crying. I would have been in shock. I wouldn't even know what to do because he's dying right here. She's dying right here. The other one's dying over there. She just died. He just died. Like, when is it my turn now? Like he said, he checked her ears and stuff. Like, when is it my turn? Like, should I just not even try anymore? Like, at the end, just to be the last one left, like I said before, it's just, why me? Why didn't it happen to me? It's kind of suspicious too to come back covered in blood and you're the only one that was left. But you can't make something like this up. Like, who would make something like this up? That's a really far-fetched story to go to the police with. You get what I'm saying?
He sees Dennis is moving behind a rock and he looks like he's not acting as erratic as everybody else. And so she starts making her way over to Dennis to see if he's going to be okay. And on the way, she sees 15-year-old Timur fall to the ground and he's suddenly lying there still. And so she believes he's dead too. She gets over to Dennis and he's bleeding profusely from all of his orifices in his head, but he's talking to her. And he's saying, okay, you need to go back to your bag, get out whatever you can that is essential, ditch the rest, and run down to the forest and I'll meet you down there.
See?
So Valentina says, okay, she makes her way up to her bag, she gets her sleeping bag and a couple other small items, and when she turns around to go back to Dennis, she sees that he's now slouched over his backpack and now the blood is just pouring out of his head, and she can tell that almost certainly he's dead as well. And so not only is she all alone, she's now totally traumatized and believes whatever has happened to them is going to happen to her. And so she runs down the mountain and she goes into the forest and she gets underneath this rock overhang. She puts her sleeping bag down, she crawls inside, and she drifts in and out of consciousness for the rest of the day. And then that night, she's still laying there and the storm picked up dramatically and she could hear all night these huge trees all over the mountain falling and slamming all around her. And so she's thinking, if I don't die from whatever killed my friends, I'm going to get hit by one of these trees. But she manages to get through the night. The next morning, the storm had cleared, and so Valentina gets up and she's thinking to herself, maybe by some miracle, one of them is still alive. And so she climbs back up the mountain to where they were, and she finds all of them still laying exactly where they were when she left them, all motionless, all deceased. And so she decides to go one by one and close each of their eyelids.
Damn,
and then she
respect.
says her goodbye, and then she turns and kind of wanders back into the forest, where she would stay for the next 4 days, desperately walking around, hoping to be rescued at some point, the whole time just expecting to die.
Respect to her, man.
Exposure from an animal attack, from whatever killed my friends. Eventually she does hear voices, and she starts making her way towards where they're coming from, and that's when she gets to the river and she sees the Ukrainian kayakers, who ultimately pick her up and bring her back to town. After authorities heard Valentina's story and realized there were other hikers out there, they launched a search party, and it would take them a month to locate them. Their bodies were contorted and their faces were locked in these grimaces that looked like they were in absolute terror and agony right as they died. In addition to missing most of their clothing and their shoes, they were also all missing their eyeballs. The autopsies were only able to conclude that hypothermia contributed to their death, although it wasn't the only factor, as well as a protein deficiency, despite the fact that they had all eaten well over the course of their trip, and that all of their lungs were very bruised, but they didn't know what that was from. But nothing the autopsy concluded could reconcile what Valentina said she saw happen, which was a sudden, violent death of 6 healthy people with no signs and symptoms
all at one time.
Suddenly, they are bleeding out of every orifice, and they're falling to the ground, tearing their clothes off, grabbing at their throats, frothing at the mouth, and then dying. And whatever happened to them, why didn't it happen to Valentina? To this day, we don't really have a good answer why that happened.
What?
And the case is closed. It was ruled they
Closed?
died of hypothermia, and it was an accident.
Bruh, hypothermia is not taking nobody eyeballs, bruh. Whatever it was turned their eyeballs into liquid, bruh. Hypothermia is not about to take your eyeballs, bro. Like ripping off the clothes and maybe freezing to death, possibly hypothermia, but you're not about to bang your head on a rock, bruh. And they never just gonna close the case, bruh. They never close cases that fast unless it's something else telling you, bro. It's always like that for some reason. Why every time it's something mysterious, the case is closed? You get what I'm saying? When missing person case, when they took that girl's clothes, it was like, oh, yeah, why you take my daughter's clothes? You ain't gonna get my daughter's clothes back, bro? It's more than what they be leading on, bro. I feel like it was something in the air, or maybe they was doing some experiment nearby and they got the whiff of it, or I don't know, and maybe she was immune to it, because some people were immune to stuff like gas training and all that stuff, bro. Like, some people were immune to it. Like, it didn't bother them. Like me, my eyes was burning, but some people it didn't bother them. Maybe she was immune to whatever was going on. I feel like there was experimenting or something on that mountain, because you don't close the case that fast, bro. This is gonna bother me. I'm gonna have to do some like external research after this, because this is not normal, and it just bothers me to know like everybody's not about to just drop dead at the same time, man. Maybe she was contagious. Maybe she had some virus or something that she gave to them. Like, you know, like I don't know. Let me know down in the comment section what you think happened, man. Because that's that.
But this isn't the first time something like this has happened in Russia. In 1959, 9 very experienced Russian hikers set off on a 16-day expedition into the Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union, and about 10 days into their hike, they reached a part where they needed to crest over this mountain before some bad weather rolled in. And they started moving up this mountain, which would be renamed the Dyatlov Pass after the leader of this group. His name is Dyatlov. They started making their way up the Dyatlov Pass, and they were going too slowly, and the weather was coming in too quickly. And so they had to make a critical decision. Stay put, but be in this totally exposed, open mountain face, much like the Hamar Daban situation where they were up on that open mountain face. Either hunker down there and get ruined by weather, and the weather was a lot worse for the Dyatlov Pass group. It was, sub-zero temperatures and just snowing ruthlessly. Or they could go down and give up ground and go down to the forest at the base of this mountain where you'd be sheltered from the storm with some trees. And so these hikers, who might be a little bit overconfident in their ability, decide to stick it out right on this mountain face. And over the course of that night, at some point, they cut open their tent with a knife from the inside and ran out into sub-zero temperatures, most of them not wearing shoes, not wearing jackets, not wearing pants. They're basically in underwear. And they calmly walked down the mountain, all the way down to the forest. And once they got down there, 2 of them tried to desperately climb this big tree where there wasn't any low-hanging branches. And so they couldn't climb up it. We don't know what they were trying to climb up it for. but they ended up building this little tiny fire that could not have provided very much warmth at all, and they were found deceased lying around this fire. The 7 other hikers were found in 2 different areas. One that appeared to go down to that tree where those 2 were, but then doubled back and tried to get up to the campsite, but didn't make it and fell to the ground and died there. The other group was not found for a couple of weeks later. They were found at the mouth of this river. They were inside of this den, and they were wearing the clothes of the other hikers that were deceased. And the clothes they had on had traces of radiation on them. And the ones that were in the den had these devastating chest and skull injuries, and one of them was missing their eyeballs. And the official statement by the Soviet Union was they died from an unknown compelling force, which is a really mysterious way to describe how someone might die.
That's a better title.
This case was actually reinvestigated in 2020, and the new cause of death is death by avalanche. Except loads of people disagree with that. In fact, experts have gone out to where this happened, and they say not only was there no avalanche, there's never been an avalanche in this area. There's literally never been one. So what do you think? Is there...
What I think is, man, how you gonna change your death by an unknown force, unknown compelling force, to an avalanche? What avalanche is plucking people eyeballs, bruh? Come on, man. Who you think you talking to, bruh? This is not a room full of kindergarten. Like, this is not first grade, man. Come on. Avalanche taking eyeballs. The same person eyeballs. Now we got a little bit further where they said radiation. Was there radiation on the other people? Maybe they were like, wait a minute, this kind of resembles the other case back to this. Let's hide this too. Like, oh my gosh, man. I need somebody to find me a Russian person that can give me some more insight on what they believe happened. Somebody that can give me some more info. Because there has to be more to it, man. All of their eyeballs were missing. It had to be some kind of radiation. Maybe it was a bug or something that bit them and she didn't get bit. Like, maybe it's something on that mountain. Maybe they need to investigate that mountain. Go take some snow samples or something. Have a science team out there when a blizzard is going on. Have something out there, man, because this is outrageous. And they investigated again 2020 because they found something. And then they changed it to avalanche, bro. Nobody's changing it to avalanche unless you found something. Why would you change it to avalanche? It took you that 30 plus years to say it was an avalanche. You would have said it was an avalanche from the beginning. You did it because you found something, man. Found something.
Is there a connection between Mrballen and the Dyatlov Pass incident? Is there a cover-up in both cases where something far more sinister has happened to both groups that we don't know about?
Yes.
Or are they unrelated and these are just both examples of Mother Nature being far more powerful than we even realize? So that's going to do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's story.
I did.
If you caught today's secret in the video, please let us know in the comment section what it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comment section. If you enjoyed today's story and you haven't done this already, please send the like button out on a blind date with Karen at a restaurant that is below perfect service and does not have a manager on call that night. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3, 4, even 5 video uploads
every week.
If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's just JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is Mrballen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mrballen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.
Uborg or Uborg, man, thank you for that video. That was disturbing. That's up there. Probably one of the most disturbing ones I've heard with not much info, man. I thought the Russian death march was going to be, they tried to march so far and they collapsed and stuff, but I don't know. Was it something in the air, kind of like The Happening, where the people start doing crazy stuff and they just die? Was it an experiment on a mountain that they walked into? I think it was some kind of experiment. Maybe there's some underground base that's there or something like that, because maybe something was underneath and the radiation probably was coming up, and the spots where those people were laying at, maybe the radiation got them pretty bad and they started bleeding out the nose. Or maybe there were some people up there, like I said, scientists experiment or something. They didn't know people were going to be there. It was the same thing in 1950 and up to the other time. I forgot the year he said. But yeah, I feel like it's something much more sinister that they don't want us to know about. Great video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, support your boy. Road to 5K. If you guys have any ideas what I should do for New Year's, let me know down there in the comment section and I'll see what I can do. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.